My family and I lived in Florida for a few years when I was really young, around the time I started to remember things. One of my earliest memories is going to this water-themed amusement park with my mom and my friend Eleanor and her mom. I don't think this was a major theme park like SeaWorld or Six Flags, and I only have memories of going there once. Anyway, we went on a few kid rides and looked at fish for a few hours. At lunchtime, we went to this building that was like a Long John Silver's, though to be clear, it was just a random restaurant in the park. I remember the cool air was refreshing when we walked in, and as our moms ordered, I asked if I could go to the bathroom by myself. I was only like 4, but my mom was okay with it. I walked over and opened the wooden door, and was immediately confused. The door led to another room, almost as large or maybe even larger than the dining area itself. There was even a long wooden table-like object running down the middle with sinks on it. I remember the room being very bright, and I was surprised to see a window on one side. It must have been a two-way mirror since I saw people walking by on the other side. Anyway, the bathroom was completely empty, so I used one of the urinals and then washed my hands. But before stepping back through the door, my curiosity got the better of me, and I started walking over to the mirror. As I did so, I couldn't help but appreciate how strange the bathroom felt. It was way too big for what it was supposed to be. The white tiles gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, and the air carried a faint whiff of chlorine, probably from the water rides outside. The long wooden table in the center had a row of sinks with those motion sensor faucets that sometimes sputtered to life on their own, making me jump a little each time. As I got closer to the mirror, I noticed it was slightly fogged up, even though the room wasn't warm. Despite letting light in from outside, I could still see a little bit of a reflection. I saw myself in the mirror, but something wasn't right. My eyes looked darker than usual, and my smile seemed off, like it wasn't mine somehow. I tilted my head, and my reflection followed, but there was a tiny delay, just enough to make me frown. I waved my hand, and it took a split second for the mirror me to catch up. I tried telling myself it was just my imagination. After all, I was only 4. Big places like this could play tricks on your mind. But then, out of nowhere, I saw something move in the reflection. It was definitely from inside the bathroom with me, not outside. It almost looked like behind me, near the sinks, there stood another kid. The person was pale, almost see-through, with wet hair plastered to their face like they just climbed out of a pool. I spun around, my sneakers squeaking on the tiles, but the bathroom was still empty. No one was there, just the drip 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 of a faucet that wouldn't shut off. My heart started pounding as I turned back to the mirror. The kid was still there, closer now, their wide, scared eyes locked on mine. They didn't look like me. Their clothes were soggy, hanging off them like they'd been underwater too long, and their face, it was hard to focus on, like a blurry photo. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. I didn't expect an answer, but the kid's mouth moved, silent at first. Then they raised a shaky hand and pointed at the door. Their lips kept moving, and I squinted to make out the words. It looked like they were saying, "He's coming, hide now." A shiver ran through me. Who was coming? Was this a game? I glanced at the door, still closed and still quiet, but when I looked back at the mirror, the kid was right behind my reflection, so close I should have felt their breath on my neck. But the real bathroom stayed empty. My stomach twisted as their finger jabbed toward the door again, more desperate this time. That's when I heard it, a slow, creaking groan as the bathroom door started to open. Heavy footsteps followed, thudding against the tiles. I didn't think, I just ran, ducking into one of the stalls and fumbling with the lock. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it, but I got it shut and climbed onto the toilet seat, tucking my feet up so they wouldn't show under the gap. Through the thin crack in the stall door, I saw him. A tall man stepped into the bathroom, wearing a park employee uniform, blue polo, khaki pants, and a name tag I couldn't read. But his eyes were wild, darting around like he was hunting for something, and he was muttering under his breath, words I couldn't make out. He moved slowly, checking each stall, rattling the handles as he went. My chest tightened, and I held my breath, praying he wouldn't see me. He stopped right in front of my stall. I could see his shadow through the crack, his hand reaching for the handle. He gave it a hard shake, and the lock rattled, but it held. I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for him to force it open, but then, crash! A loud bang echoed from outside, like a trash can tipping over or something heavy falling. The man cursed, low and angry, and his footsteps retreated, fast, heading out of the bathroom. I stayed there, frozen, until the silence stretched on too long. When I finally peeked out, the bathroom was empty again. No man, no kid, just the dripping faucet and that creepy two-way mirror. I bolted back to the dining area, my heart slamming against my ribs, and found my mom still waiting for our food. I tried to explain what just happened, the kid in the mirror, the man, and the warning, but she just smiled and said I had a wild imagination. Eleanor's mom laughed too, saying I'd probably seen my own reflection and scared myself. I really wanted to believe them, but later that day, as we were leaving the park, I overheard two security guards talking near the exit. They were saying something about a guy they'd caught, a man posing as a park employee, trying to lure kids away from their parents. They'd nabbed him after someone reported him hanging around the bathrooms, acting strange. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying it in my head, the kid in the mirror, the way they pointed, the fear in their eyes. Who were they? A ghost? Some kind of warning from something else? Like I said, I never went back to that park, and we moved out of Florida a year later, so I'll never know for sure. But sometimes, even now, when I pass a mirror, I catch myself holding my breath. It feels like I'm waiting to see if someone else is looking back. A few years ago, my wife Laura decided to have some of her jewelry cleaned. For the record, she doesn't wear a lot. It was just a handful of earrings, a necklace from her grandmother, and our wedding rings. I'd heard good things about this local jeweler, so one Saturday we drove over there. It was located in one of those old office park buildings that looked like it had been built in the 70s. There were a few stories and the jeweler was at the top, so Laura and I stepped into the cramped elevator. It took like 30 seconds to close, and Laura laughed nervously at the crunching sounds it made as we moved slowly upwards. Eventually it opened into this even more narrow hallway. We were hit with this musty odor. Laura and I exchanged glances, then consulted the directory and headed down the corridor. On the way, I noticed a bathroom, and figured I might as well go now. The bathroom door was one of those heavy, industrial types with chipped beige paint. It groaned as I pushed it open, revealing a small, dimly lit space that smelled faintly of damp concrete and stale air. A single flickering fluorescent bulb hung overhead, casting jittery shadows across the cracked tile floor. There were two stalls on the left, their doors scratched and dented, and a single sink with a cloudy mirror on the right. The first stall door was slightly ajar, swaying just enough to catch my eye, while the second was wide open. I stepped inside, my shoes squeaking faintly on the tiles, and opted for the open stall. As I stood there, I couldn't shake the feeling that the room was too quiet. No hum of ventilation, no drip of a faucet, just an oppressive stillness. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a soft tap, like a finger against metal, coming from the other stall. I froze midstream and listened. Tap, tap, tap. It was rhythmic and definitely deliberate. Still, I told myself it was just the building settling. Old places like this were full of weird noises. The hairs on my neck still stood up anyway. I finished quickly and stepped out, glancing at the first stall. The door was still ajar, but now it seemed a little wider, as if it had moved while I was inside. I shook it off and headed to the sink. The water came out in a weak, lukewarm trickle, and I rubbed my hands under it, avoiding my reflection in the smudged mirror at first. When I finally looked up, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. In the reflection, the first stall door was fully open, revealing the empty space inside, except it hadn't been empty a second ago. I whipped around, heart pounding, but the door was still only slightly ajar, just like before. I stared at it, waiting for movement, but nothing happened. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. Yeah, this place was getting under my skin. I turned back to the sink to shut off the water, and that's when I heard it, a low, guttural hum, like someone exhaling through clenched teeth. It was coming from behind me, from the direction of the stalls. I spun around again, this time calling out, "Hey, is someone there?" My voice sounded thin, swallowed by the tiles. No answer, just that dead silence again. I took a step toward the door, ready to get the hell out, when the humming started back up, louder this time, almost vibrating through the floor. I glanced at the first stall, and my breath caught. The door was moving, slowly swinging shut inch by inch, with no visible force behind it. I backed up, my shoulder hitting the sink, and watched as it clicked into place. Then, from behind the closed door, I heard a sound that still haunts me, a wet, choking cough, like someone struggling to breathe. It lasted maybe 3 seconds before cutting off abruptly. I didn't wait to figure it out. I yanked the bathroom door open and stumbled into the hallway, nearly colliding with the wall. Laura was still down by the jeweler's, flipping through a magazine, and looked up when she saw me. "You okay?" she asked, slightly frowning. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "There was something in there," I managed, my voice shaky. "Noises. The stall door moved on its own." Laura just rolled her eyes. It's an old building, babe. Probably just drafts or bad plumbing. Come on, let's get this over with. I wanted to believe her, so I followed her into the jeweler's, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was in that bathroom wasn't normal. The clerk took Laura's jewelry, and while she chatted with him, I wandered over to the window trying to calm down. That's when I overheard two employees talking near the counter. "Did you hear about the guy last month?" one of them said, keeping his voice low. "They found him in the bathroom up here, passed out cold. Said he heard coughing and thought someone was dying in there." The other guy snorted. "Yeah, the cop said he was just drunk. This place is falling apart, probably carbon monoxide or something." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Carbon monoxide didn't explain a door moving on its own, or that awful wet cough. When we left the building, I kept my mouth shut, but I couldn't stop replaying it in my head. A few days later, I looked up the office park online, digging through local forums. Most of it was boring, complaints about parking and leaky roofs, but then I found a thread from a couple of years back. Someone claimed they'd worked there in the 80s and swore the top floor bathroom was cursed. They said a janitor had collapsed in there one night, choked on something, and died before anyone found him. People laughed it off in the comments, but a few others chimed in with their own stories, strange noises, feelings of being watched, even a shadow that didn't belong. Honestly, I don't know what I believe. Maybe it was just my imagination running wild in a creepy old building. But I've also never used a bathroom in a place like that again, and every time I hear a cough, especially a wet one, I feel that same icy dread creeping back. When I finally moved into my own house a few years after graduating college and getting a job, it was a big step up for me. At the time, I really only thought about having my buddies over, but my mom heavily encouraged me to not skimp on decorations in hopes that I might have a woman over someday. So on a random Tuesday evening, I found myself wandering around this huge furniture store. I'd been there for half an hour and managed to pick out a couch and recliner when I kept walking and noticed I was now in the bathroom section. But this wasn't just like the aisles with toilets and sinks in a store like Home Depot or Lowe's. This place was massive, with porcelain stretching as far as the eye could see. The bathroom section was a sprawling jungle of gleaming fixtures, tubs with ornate feet, sinks with polished faucets, and toilets lined up like silent sentinels. The air smelled faintly of ceramic and cleaning products, and the overhead lights flickered every few seconds, casting jittery shadows across the white tiles. It was almost closing time, and the store felt deserted. My sneakers squeaked against the floor, the sound echoing in a way that made me feel uncomfortably alone. I was inspecting a sleek, modern shower stall when I noticed her. She was standing at the end of the aisle, framed by a towering display of mirrors. She was gorgeous, tall and slender, with brown hair tied back in a messy bun. She wore a tight black turtleneck and snug jeans that hugged her figure perfectly, modest yet striking. But right from the get-go, I noticed something about her was off. Her hands were clenched at her sides, and she was shifting her weight from one foot to the other, her eyes darting around like a trapped animal. "Hey," I said cautiously, offering a small wave. "You okay?" She snapped her head towards me, her gaze locking onto mine with an intensity that made my stomach twist. "Do you know where the real bathrooms are?" Her voice was sharp, almost accusatory. I think they're near the front," I replied, pointing vaguely behind me. "By the checkout, maybe?" She took a step closer, her movements jerky. "I've been looking everywhere. I need one now." Her tone was insistent, and she crossed her arms tightly over her chest, as if holding herself together. For some reason, I didn't believe she actually needed to use the restroom. For one thing, how could she have not seen the restrooms when she first walked in? And for another, her tone and movements were really off. I figured she had to have something going on, and I decided to help her nonetheless. It was an odd encounter, but she looked genuinely distressed. "I can help you find one," I offered, figuring it wouldn't take long. I planned to walk her back to the front, where maybe a store employee could help her use the phone or something. The woman nodded quickly, falling in a step beside me as we navigated the maze of bathroom displays. The store seemed to stretch on forever, aisles looping and doubling back in a disorienting tangle. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that her presence was strange. She kept muttering under her breath, phrases I couldn't quite catch, like, "not again," and "why here?" Every few steps, too, she'd stop abruptly, glance around, then rush to catch up. "You sure you're all right?" I asked again, my unease growing. She flashed a tight smile. "Fine, just, we need to go." We passed a row of vintage vanities when I heard it, a low, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails on porcelain. I froze, scanning the aisle, but it was empty. The sound stopped as suddenly as it started, leaving only the hum of the lights. "Did you—" I began, but she cut me off. "Keep going," she snapped, her voice edged with panic. She grabbed my wrist, her grip cold and firm, and pulled me forward. My heart started racing. Something was seriously wrong here, and I started to regret trying to help this woman. The tapping came again, louder this time, echoing from a display bathroom to our left. It was a mock-up with a clawfoot tub and a cracked mirror. I glanced inside and swore I saw movement, a shadow shifting behind the tub, but when I blinked, it was gone. "There's something here," I whispered, my mouth dry. "I think we're being followed." The woman's eyes widened and she squeezed my wrist harder. "No, let's go." I still wasn't sure what her deal was, but her desperation was contagious, and I picked up the pace, leading her through the twisting aisles. The tapping began to morph into a faint splashing sound, like water dripping from a faucet, but none of the displays were plumbed. The lights flickered more violently now, plunging sections of the store into momentary darkness. I could feel my pulse in my throat, convinced we were being hunted by something, or someone, lurking just out of sight. Finally, we stumbled upon a small, unmarked door tucked behind a stack of shower heads. A faded restroom sign hung crookedly above it. I pushed it open, revealing a cramped, dimly lit bathroom with a single stall. The woman let go of my wrist and bolted inside, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, catching my breath, listening to the eerie silence that settled over the store. The tapping and splashing had stopped, but a second later I heard a new noise from inside. It sounded like a faucet had been turned on full blast, and another second later I began hearing a moan. The sound of water running must have lasted for a full minute before finally slowing and then stopping. Then the door creaked open and the woman stepped out. The change was startling. Her face was relaxed, her posture loose, and she let out a long, contented sigh. "Oh, thank God," she said, her voice warm and normal. "I thought I was going to explode." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "That's it? You really just had to pee?" She laughed, a bright, genuine sound that cut through the lingering tension. "Yeah, really, really badly. I'm sorry if I freaked you out. I've been holding it since I got here an hour ago." I couldn't help but laugh too, the absurdity of it washing away my fear. "You had me thinking you were like possessed or something." She grinned, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Nope, just a girl with a tiny bladder. I'm Emily, by the way." "Mark," I said, still chuckling as I shook her hand. Her touch was warm now, and the weirdness of the past few minutes faded into a funny story. We made our way back to the main store, chatting like old friends. The creepy noises and shadows didn't return. Maybe it's just the acoustics of the place, or my imagination running wild in the empty aisles. Emily turned out to be shopping for her own place too, and we bonded over our mutual hatred of confusing furniture stores. That night led to coffee the next week, then a date, and eventually a life together. Years later, we're married, living happily in that house my mom insisted I decorate. We still joke about our bathroom horror story, but sometimes when I'm alone, I think back to that tapping and the shadow I saw. Was it just the store playing tricks on me, or was something else there, guiding us to that restroom? I'll never know, and honestly I don't care, because whatever it was, it brought me to Emily. I do interior design for relatively upscale houses in a medium to large size city. For privacy, I won't give specific details, but that doesn't really matter for this story. A significant part of my job involves visiting clients' homes and looking around, and I could tell many stories about strange and somewhat disturbing things I've seen over the years. However, one client, and one bathroom specifically, was bizarre and chilling. It started with a call from a man named Mr. Ellison. He was polite but curt, explaining that he'd recently moved into an old estate on the outskirts of the city and needed a bathroom renovated. He didn't say much beyond that, just gave me the address and asked me to come by the next afternoon. I'd worked with reserved clients before, so I didn't think much of it. When I arrived, the house was stunning, a sprawling 3-story relic with ivy creeping up the brick walls and tall arched windows. It genuinely looked like something out of a Gothic novel, equal parts beautiful and foreboding. Mr. Ellison met me at the door. He was in his late 50s, tall and thin, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to linger on me a little too long. He didn't smile, instead he just nodded and said, "The bathroom's this way." He led me through the house, past rooms filled with antique furniture draped in dust covers, and up a creaking staircase to the second floor. The air felt heavy, like the place hadn't been lived in for years, though he'd claimed he just moved in. We stopped at a door at the end of a long hallway. "This is it," he said, pushing it open. The bathroom was massive, easily twice the size of most I'd seen in houses like this. It had a black and white checkered floor, a deep porcelain tub, and a wide vanity with a cracked oval mirror. The walls were lined with faded floral wallpaper peeling at the edges, and a single bulb flickered overhead, casting jittery shadows. It was outdated but had potential, exactly the kind of project I loved. Still, something about it felt off. Maybe it was the musty smell, or the way the light seemed to dim when I stepped inside. Mr. Ellison hovered in the doorway, watching me as I started taking notes. "I want it modernized," he said, his voice low. "But don't touch the tub, it stays." His tone was firm, almost possessive, and I glanced at him, nodding. Clients got attached to weird things sometimes. I set my bag down and began measuring the space, jotting down dimensions. That's when I heard it, a faint tapping, like fingernails on glass. I froze, looking around. The sound seemed to come from the mirror. I stepped closer, peering at the cracked surface. My reflection stared back, distorted by the fractures, but for a split second I swore I saw something else, something behind me, a shape that didn't match the room. I whipped around, heart pounding, but it was just Mr. Ellison, still standing there, his expression unreadable. "Did you hear that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hear what?" he replied, tilting his head slightly. "Like tapping from the mirror." Mr. Ellison didn't answer right away, instead he just kept staring. Then he said, "Old houses make noises, you get used to it." I forced a smile and went back to work, but the unease wouldn't leave me. As I measured the tub, I noticed something odd. The water stains inside it weren't random, they formed a pattern, almost like handprints pressing up from below. I ran my fingers along the edge, and the porcelain felt cold, unnaturally so, even for a drafty house. I pulled my hand back, shaking off the chill. Mr. Ellison stepped into the room then, closer than before. "You're not planning to move it, are you?" he asked, his voice sharp. No, I said quickly. "You said to leave it. I'll work around it." He nodded, but his eyes didn't leave me. I decided to wrap up fast. I'd get the basics and finish the detailed plans later. As I bent down to grab my tape measure, I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. Louder this time, insistent, coming from the mirror. I stood up, staring at it. The crack seemed deeper now, spreading like spider webs, and in the reflection I saw it, a pale hand. It was pressed against the glass from the other side. I stumbled back, dropping my notebook. "What the hell is that?" I gasped, pointing at the mirror. Mr. Ellison didn't even flinch. "You're imagining things," he said calmly. "It's just the house settling." But I knew what I'd seen. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my bag. I need to step outside for a minute," I stammered, pushing past him. He didn't stop me, just watched as I hurried down the hall and out the front door. I sat in my car, trying to calm down. It had to be a trick of the light, or stress, something rational. But those handprints in the tub, and the tapping, and that hand, I couldn't explain it. Against my better judgment, I decided to go back. I needed my notebook, and I wasn't about to let some creepy vibe scare me off a job. When I returned, Mr. Ellison was waiting in the foyer. "Thought you left," he said, almost amused. "Just needed air," I muttered, heading upstairs. The bathroom door was still open, and I stepped inside, scanning for my notebook. It was by the tub, right where I dropped it. I grabbed it and turned to leave, but then I heard it, a low, gurgling sound, like water bubbling up from a drain. I looked at the tub. The faucet wasn't running, but water was pooling inside, dark and thick, rising fast. I backed toward the door, but Mr. Ellison was there, blocking it. "You shouldn't have come back," he said, his voice different now, deeper and colder. The gurgling grew louder, and I glanced at the tub. Something was moving in the water, a shadow beneath the surface, long and thin, like an arm reaching up. I shoved past him, adrenaline surging, and ran down the stairs. The front door wouldn't budge. It was locked or stuck. I didn't care. I yanked it open with all my strength and bolted to my car, peeling out of the driveway without looking back. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that tub, that water, and that thing. I quit the job the next day, emailing Mr. Ellison some excuse about scheduling conflicts. He never replied. Weeks later, I was at a coffee shop when I overheard two locals talking about the old estate. One mentioned a woman who lived there decades ago, a recluse who drowned in her bathtub under strange circumstances. They said the house had been empty ever since, until recently. I haven't driven by that place since, but sometimes, late at night, I still hear it. That tap 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 sound, like fingernails on glass. And I wonder if whatever was in that bathroom is still there, waiting. I'm sure this sounds like a cliche opening to a horror movie, but when I was 23, I inherited a rather large house in the country from my uncle after he passed away. Now, to be clear, this wasn't actually a mansion, and our family isn't super rich. The situation mostly happened because my uncle didn't have any kids of his own, and I'm an only child. The house sat alone in the middle of a dense forest, miles from the nearest neighbor, surrounded by gnarled trees that blocked out most of the sunlight. It was an old, rambling place with creaking floors and peeling paint, the kind of house that looked like it had stories to tell, and none of them good. My uncle had lived there for decades, a solitary man I'd only met a handful of times at family gatherings. When he died, I was surprised to learn he left it to me. I figured I'd fix it up, maybe sell it, and pocket some cash. That was the plan anyway. My first day there, I just wandered through the house, taking stock of the clutter, faded curtains, stacks of yellowed newspapers, and a rusty shotgun propped in one corner. It was eerie, but manageable. Then I found the bathroom on the third floor. It was massive, like something you'd see in an abandoned school or a roadside rest stop, not a private home. 8 stalls lined one wall, their wooden doors chipped and warped. A row of cracked sinks stretched along the opposite side, each with a tarnished mirror above it. The tiles were a dingy gray, slick with moisture, and a single fluorescent light buzzed overhead, flickering every few seconds. The air felt heavy, thick with the smell of mold and something metallic I couldn't place. I didn't think much of it at first, just another weird quirk of an old house. But that night, as I settled into a creaky bed downstairs, I heard something. It was faint, almost like static, coming from above. I held my breath and listened. There it was again, a soft, rhythmic thud, like someone pacing across the tiles. Then, a sharp clink, like a coin dropping into a sink. I told myself it was pipes or mice. Old houses made noises. But the sounds didn't stop. Instead, they grew louder and more deliberate, until I couldn't ignore them. Grabbing a flashlight, I climbed the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the silent house. The bathroom door was closed, though I didn't remember shutting it. I pushed it open, and the fluorescent light flickered on, bathing the room in a sickly glow. Everything looked normal, stalls, sinks, and mirrors, but the air felt wrong somehow, like it was pressing down on me. I checked each stall, finding nothing but cobwebs and a rusted bolt on the door. The sounds had stopped the moment I entered. I decided to go back to bed, chalking it up to exhaustion. But the next night, it happened again, thudding footsteps, the clink of metal, and now a new sound, a low hum, like someone mumbling under their breath. Again, I tried to ignore it, but by the third night I couldn't take it anymore. I stormed upstairs, flashlight in hand, ready to prove it was all in my head. Somehow, the bathroom was different this time. The stalls seemed farther apart, the room stretching longer than it should have. The mirrors reflected the flickering light, but the angles were off, like they weren't showing the room I was standing in. I stepped forward, and the humming grew louder, coming from the last stall. My heart pounded as I approached, the beam of my flashlight trembling. The door was ajar, and inside, scratched into the wood, were tally marks, dozens of them, uneven and frantic, like someone had been counting days. I backed away, my skin prickling, and that's when I saw it, a shadow in the mirror, tall and thin, standing behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. The reflection was gone when I looked again, but the humming turned into words, garbled, overlapping voices whispering my name. I stopped sleeping after that. The bathroom became an obsession. I'd hear the noises every night, and sometimes during the day I'd catch glimpses of movement, fingers curling around a stall door, a face peering from the edge of a mirror, gone when I blinked. The room kept changing too. One day, there were 9 stalls instead of 8. The next, the sinks were dripping black water that smelled like rust and decay. Desperate, I started digging through my uncle's things. In a locked drawer in his study, I found a stack of letters, brittle and stained. They were addressed to no one, written in his shaky hand. Most were ramblings about the threshold and the watchers, but one stood out. The bathroom is alive. It takes what it wants. I tried to stop it, but it's too late. If you're reading this, leave. Don't look in the mirrors. I know I should have listened, but for some reason I didn't. I went back, armed with a hammer and nails to board it up. But when I stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind me. The lights flickered out and the room expanded, stalls stretching into the darkness, mirrors lining every wall, reflecting not me, but them. Figures with hollow eyes and twisted limbs crawling out of the glass, their voices a deafening chorus. Stay, stay, stay. I swung the hammer, shattering a mirror, but it only multiplied the reflections. The floor tilted, and I stumbled into a stall that hadn't been there before. Inside was a sink, overflowing with that black water, and a mirror showing my uncle's face, pale, eyeless, and screaming silently. The walls closed in, the tally marks glowing red, and I felt hands, cold, wet hands, grabbing my arms. They were pulling me toward the glass. I don't know how I got out. I remember screaming, clawing at the door until it gave way. I tumbled into the hallway, the bathroom snapping back to normal behind me. I nailed the door shut that night, piling furniture against it for good measure. The noises stopped, but the house felt different, watchful and waiting. I sold it a month later, dirt cheap, to some guy who didn't ask questions. I told him the third floor was off limits, but I doubt he listened. Sometimes I dream about that bathroom, endless stalls, mirrors that don't lie, and my uncle's voice whispering, "You left me there." Last week I got a call from an unknown number. No one spoke, it was just static and a faint, familiar hum. I hung up, but the sound hasn't left my head. In 5th grade, my class had to do this project where we designed board games. Me and my group made something which I guess was a lot like Clue. Specifically, we drew this big house with different rooms, and the players had to figure out where different mystery objects were. Honestly, it would have been pretty forgettable, were it not for this one kid in our group named Scott. Scott was in charge of drawing the bathroom, something he'd volunteered enthusiastically for, and it was clear he was pretty obsessed. At first glance, Scott wasn't the kind of kid who stood out. He was skinny, pale, with dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept in weeks. Most of the time he just sat there, doodling in the margins of his notebook, but when Mrs. Carter assigned the board game project and we started dividing up the rooms, his hand shot up. "I'll do the bathroom," he said, almost too fast. We didn't care, as bathrooms weren't exactly the exciting part of a mystery game, so we let him have it. The rest of us threw together our rooms with half-hearted sketches, a lopsided kitchen, a living room with a stick figure couch. But Scott, he went all in. He brought in this folded up piece of graph paper the next day, and when he spread it out, it was like something out of a horror movie. The bathroom was huge, way too big for our little game board, drawn in black ink with details that didn't belong. The sink had rust stains creeping up from the drain, the tiles were chipped and stained, and the shower curtain hung crooked, with these faint, smudged outlines behind it. They were like shadows of people who weren't there. Scott had even drawn the pipes under the floor, twisting and gnarled like veins. "What is all this for?" I asked, pointing at the pipes. Scott didn't look up from his pencil. "It's what's underneath," he muttered. "You don't see it, but it's there." I figured he was just being weird, so I let it go. But then he added something that stuck with me, a tiny trapdoor in the corner of the bathroom, barely noticeable unless you squinted. It was scratched into the paper so hard the pencil had torn through in spots. When I asked what it was, he just smirked and said, "That's where you lose." The game itself was simple. Roll the dice, move your piece, and find the hidden objects. The bathroom was supposed to be just another spot on the board, but Scott insisted it had its own rule. If you land there, he said, you have to draw a card. He'd made these little cards himself, scribbled in his shaky handwriting. Most of them said dumb stuff like, "You found a rusty key," or "The sink drips louder." But one card, just one, said, "Check the trap door." Scott wouldn't tell us what it meant, only that it was the end. Presentation day came, and we set up our game in the classroom. The other groups had bright, goofy boards with spaceships and treasure maps, but ours looked like a haunted house, mostly because of Scott's bathroom. It dwarfed everything else, sucking the color out of the paper around it. When we played a test round for the class, I rolled a dice and landed on the bathroom first. I drew a card, checked the trap door. Everyone laughed, thinking it was some edgy twist, but Scott didn't. He leaned forward, his voice low. "You shouldn't have done that," he said. I rolled my eyes and asked what happened next. He didn't answer, just stared at the board, his fingers tapping the table like he was waiting for something. That afternoon, I walked home past Scott's street. I don't know why I did it, curiosity maybe, but I ended up at his house. His mom was outside gardening, and when I asked if Scott was around, she said he was upstairs. "Go on up," she told me, so I did. The house was old and creaky, with this musty smell that clung to everything. I found Scott's room at the end of the hall, door half open. He wasn't there, but I heard water running, slow, steady drips, like a faucet left on. It was coming from a door across the hall, cracked open just enough to see inside. It was a bathroom, not the one from the drawing, not exactly, but close enough to make my stomach drop. The tiles were yellowed, the sink was chipped, and the mirror was fogged up despite the cold air. I pushed the door wider and saw Scott standing there, facing the wall. He was holding a pencil, scratching something into the paint, lines, curves, over and over, like he was carving the same shape again and again. The dripping got louder, and I realized it wasn't the faucet. It was coming from under the floor. "Scott?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. He stopped scratching and turned his head, not all the way, just enough that I could see his eyes, wide and glassy. "You checked the trap door," he said, like it was an accusation. Before I could respond, the dripping turned into a gurgle, deep and wet, like something unclogging. I looked down and saw it, a small, square outline in the tiles, a trap door, just like the one he'd drawn. It was trembling, like something was pushing up from below. I didn't wait to find out what. I bolted, stumbling down the stairs and out the front door, past his mom who didn't even look up. Scott didn't come to school the next day, or the day after that. A week later, Mrs. Carter said he moved away, sudden, with no explanation. We never finished presenting the game, and I shoved it in my closet, trying to forget. Years later, I was cleaning out my stuff before college and found that old board again. The paper was brittle, the ink faded, except for Scott's bathroom. It looked fresher than ever, the trapdoor darker, like it had been redrawn. I don't know why, but I flipped over one of his cards, the one I'd pulled that day. On the back, in tiny scratched letters, it said, "It's still under there." I tore the whole thing up and threw it out, but that night I woke up to dripping. Slow and steady from under my bathroom floor. I haven't slept right since. Back when Twilight Breaking Dawn came out, I saw it in theaters with my best friend Sabrina. We saw it opening weekend and the theater was packed. By the end of it, Sabrina and I both had to use the restroom pretty badly, but of course we had to stay until the credits. When the movie was finally over, we bolted up and made our way directly to the bathrooms, but of course there was already a line out the door when we got there. However, the entrance to the men's restroom was directly next to the women's, and as only Twilight had let out, there didn't seem to be anyone in there. Sabrina and I exchanged glances, then decided we had to go for it. We slipped through the door, our footsteps echoing faintly as it swung shut behind us. The men's restroom was a stark contrast to the bustling hallway we just left. Quiet, almost too quiet. The air was cool and damp, carrying a faint whiff of stale water and something sharper, like rust or old metal. The lights overhead buzzed faintly, one of them flickering in a way that made the shadows jump across the cracked tile floor. There were 3 stalls along the back wall, their green paint chipping and peeling, and a row of sinks with cloudy, scratched mirrors on the right. It wasn't exactly inviting, but we were desperate. "Go ahead," I whispered to Sabrina, nodding toward the stalls. She gave me a quick, nervous smile and hurried into the first one, the lock clicking into place behind her. I leaned against the edge of a sink, crossing my arms and trying to ignore the growing ache in my bladder. The silence pressed in around me, thick and heavy, broken only by the occasional drip from one of the faucets. I glanced at myself in the mirror, my reflection distorted by the smudges and the unsteady light. That's when I heard it, a faint tapping sound, like fingernails against metal. It was soft at first, almost easy to dismiss, but it was coming from somewhere deeper in the bathroom. I straightened up, my eyes darting to the stalls. Sabrina was still in hers, and the other 2 doors were closed tight. The tapping stopped, then started again, a little louder, a little more insistent. My stomach twisted. "Sabrina?" I called quietly, hoping it was just her fidgeting. "Yeah?" Her voice came muffled through the stall door, sounding distracted but calm. The tapping wasn't her. I swallowed hard, my gaze shifting to the farthest stall. The door was shut, but there was something about it, maybe the way the shadows pulled beneath it, that made my skin crawl. I took a step closer, then froze as the tapping turned into a slow, deliberate scrape. It sounded like something, or someone, was dragging a nail along the inside of the stall door. "Sabrina, hurry up," I said, my voice tighter than I meant it to be. "Almost done," she replied, oblivious to the noise. But I wasn't. The scraping stopped, and for a moment there was nothing but the hum of the lights. Then, a low creak, metal hinges groaning as the far stall door shifted, opening just a crack. I held my breath, staring at the sliver of darkness beyond it. The air felt colder now, and heavier, like it was pressing down on me. The door creaked again, inching open wider. I couldn't see anything inside, just black, like the light didn't reach that far. My heart pounded in my chest, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I couldn't move. Then, from that darkness, came a sound I'll never forget, a wet, gurgling breath, like someone trying to speak through a throat full of water. "Sabrina," I hissed, louder this time. The stall door she was in banged open, and she stumbled out, yanking her jeans up. "What's wrong with you?" she started to say, but then she saw my face and followed my gaze to the far stall. The door was still now, half open, revealing nothing but shadow. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. "Hear what?" she frowned, stepping closer to me. But before I could answer, the lights flickered, once, then twice, plunging us into darkness for a heartbeat. When they buzzed back on, the far stall door was wide open, and the scraping started again, faster now, like claws raking against the wall. "Let's go," I said, grabbing her arm. She didn't argue. We turned for the exit, but as we did, something caught my eye in the mirror. Reflected behind us was a shape, tall and hunched, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Its skin looked gray and slick, like it was dripping, and its eyes, they were too big, too white, staring right at us. I whipped around, but there was nothing there, just the empty bathroom, the open stall, and the flickering lights. Sabrina yanked the door open, and we spilled into the hallway, nearly crashing into the crowd still waiting for the women's restroom. A few people laughed, and others gave us annoyed looks, but I didn't care. My hands were shaking, my breath coming in short gasps. Sabrina was pale, her eyes wide. "What was that?" she whispered. "I don't know," I said, glancing back at the men's restroom door as it swung shut. The chatter of the crowd drowned out any sounds from inside, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had seen us. Something that didn't belong in that theater, or maybe anywhere. We didn't stick around to find out. We grabbed our stuff and left, avoiding that bathroom, that hallway, and that theater entirely from then on. But sometimes, late at night, I hear that scraping sound again, faint and distant. It sounds like it's coming from the other side of a wall. And I wonder if whatever was in there followed us out. I took this modeling and clay working class back in college, and somehow, despite my best intentions, I ended up with something that genuinely resembled a toilet. It started as a half-hearted joke, my attempt to mock the pretentious vibe of the art department, but by the time I'd smoothed the clay and shaped the bowl, it looked eerily convincing. My classmates thought it was hilarious, and even Professor Hayden, a wiry guy with a permanent clay dust coating, gave it an approving nod. "Unorthodox, Jordan," he said, "but it's got character." I didn't think much of it beyond that, at least not until later. The class was held in the old wing of the campus art building, a crumbling relic from the 1920s with creaky floors and windows that rattled in the wind. Most students avoided it after dark, claiming it felt off, but I didn't buy into ghost stories. I'd often stay late to finish projects, enjoying the quiet. One night, about a week after my toilet was fired in the kiln, I was alone in the studio, sanding down some edges. It was pushing 11 p.m., and the building was dead silent, until I heard it. There was a faint but unmistakable thump. It was like something heavy shifting in the distance. I froze, my sandpaper hovering over the clay. It came again, louder this time, from the direction of the basement stairs. The bathroom was down there, a grimy little space no one used unless they had to. I told myself it was just pipe settling. Old buildings make noises, right? But then I heard another sound, a low, wet gurgle, like water struggling through a clogged drain. It wasn't stopping. I grabbed my phone, switched on the flashlight, and headed toward the stairs. The air grew colder as I descended, the musty smell of damp concrete hitting me hard. The bathroom door was at the bottom, a chipped slab of wood with a faded men's sign. The gurgling was louder now, unmistakable, coming from inside. I hesitated, my hand on the knob. Every instinct screamed in me to turn back, but I'd always prided myself on not being a coward, so I pushed the door open. The bathroom was dimly lit by a single bulb, its yellow glow flickering like a dying firefly. The tiles were cracked, stained with years of neglect, and the air smelled wrong, sharp, metallic, mixed with something sour I couldn't place. The gurgling came from the middle stall, the one with the door that never latched right. I stepped closer, my sneakers squeaking on the wet floor. I glanced down. There was grayish water seeping from under the stall, pooling around my feet. It wasn't clear like a leak should be. It was murky, thick, almost oily. I nudged the stall door with my foot. It creaked open, and my breath caught. Sitting there, on the rusted toilet frame, was my clay toilet. Not a real one, not a replacement. My project, the one I left upstairs in the studio. Its smooth, glossy surface gleamed under the light, but something was off. The clay looked soft, like it hadn't fully hardened. And then I saw it move, a slight ripple across the rim, like a muscle flexing. I blinked, sure I was imagining it, but then the gurgling turned into a hiss, and the bowl started to fill. Not with water, but with clay. Thick gray sludge bubbled up, spilling over the edge and splattering onto the floor. I stumbled back, my phone slipping from my hand and clattering into the puddle. The light caught something in the clay, shapes, faint at first, then clearer. They were faces, tiny distorted faces, pressed against the surface like they were trying to break free, their mouths stretched in silent screams. "Jordan," a voice whispered. It wasn't coming from the toilet, it was behind me. I spun around, but the bathroom was empty. The door was still open, the hallway beyond dark and silent. "Jordan," it came again, closer, wet and guttural, like someone speaking through a mouthful of mud. I turned back to the stall, and that's when I saw it. The clay was climbing the walls, spreading like a living thing, tendrils stretching towards me. I bolted for the door, slipping in the muck, and threw myself into the hallway. The gurgling stopped abruptly, replaced by a heavy silence. I didn't dare look back until I'd scrambled up the stairs and back to the studio. My toilet, the real one, was still there, sitting on the workbench, dry and lifeless. My phone was gone, left in the bathroom, but I wasn't going back for it. I grabbed my bag and got out of there, locking the studio door behind me. The next day, I told myself it was a hallucination, exhaustion maybe, or some weird chemical fumes from the kiln. I even went back to the basement bathroom during daylight hours with a couple of classmates in tow. This time the floor was dry, the stall was empty, my phone was sitting on the sink, battery dead but otherwise fine. There was no clay, there were no faces, there was nothing. My friends laughed when I told them, chalking it up to me pulling an all-nighter. But I still couldn't shake it. That night, in my apartment, I heard the gurgling again. It was faint and distant, but it was coming from my own bathroom. I didn't check it. I couldn't. However, over the next few weeks, it kept happening. Wet footsteps in the hall when I was alone, a glimpse of something gray in the corner of my eye. That same metallic smell creeping into my room. Once, I woke up to find my hands streaked with clay dust, though I hadn't touched this stuff since that night. I dropped the class after that. Professor Hayden said he'd dispose of my project, but I never saw it leave the studio. I avoid that building now, and I don't use public restrooms if I can help it. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear that gurgle, like it's following me, waiting for me to slip up and look too closely. And last week, when I was brushing my teeth, I swear I saw something in the mirror, just for a second, a shadow that wasn't mine. It was accompanied by a face that wasn't human. I don't know what I made in that class, but I think it's still out there, somewhere, watching me. There's this park not far from my house, and I usually walk there at least once a week to help myself relax. One time, I noticed someone left a toilet by one of the benches. It looked brand new, like it hadn't ever been used, and I half expected this to be a prank where someone was going to run out of the woods and sit on it. But even after sitting down next to it for a minute or two, there was nothing. The park was quiet, save for the rustling of leaves in the evening breeze, and the sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I figured it was just some odd junk someone dumped, shook my head with a smirk, and kept walking. Little did I know, that toilet was about to drag me into something I'd never forget. The next day, I was back home, going about my routine. It was late afternoon when I stepped into my bathroom to wash my hands. As I turned on the faucet, I heard a faint drip drip drip, not from the sink, but from somewhere deeper in the room. I glanced around, confused. The shower was off, the toilet wasn't running, and yet the sound persisted, steady and deliberate, like a leaking pipe behind the walls. I checked under the sink, but everything was dry. Shrugging it off as old house quirks, I finished up and left. But that night, as I was brushing my teeth, the dripping returned, louder and more insistent. I leaned toward the mirror, listening closely, and that's when I noticed it. The sound wasn't coming from the pipes, it was coming from the toilet itself. I stared at it, a chill creeping up my neck. The water in the bowl was still, but the dripping echoed from within, like something was tapping against the porcelain from the inside. I flushed it, hoping to drown out the noise, but it only got worse, a rhythmic tap 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 that made my stomach twist. I tried telling myself it was nothing, maybe a loose part or trapped air, and went to bed. But needless to say, sleep didn't come easy. I kept picturing that toilet in the park, its pristine white surface glinting in the dusk, and wondering why it felt so off. The next morning, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I went back to the park to see if the toilet was still there, and sure enough, it sat by the bench, untouched. It looked even more out of place in the daylight. I decided to sit next to it again, staring at it like it held some secret. That's when I noticed something I'd missed before, a faint scratch on the rim, barely visible unless you were looking for it. It wasn't random, it looked like a word. I leaned closer, squinting, and made it out. Listen. My heart skipped a beat. Listen to what? The wind picked up, rustling the trees. For a moment, I thought I heard a whisper carried on it, low and garbled, like someone speaking underwater. I stood up fast, backing away, my eyes locked on that toilet. It didn't move and didn't change, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me somehow. I left the park in a hurry, telling myself I was overreacting, but the unease clung to me like damp clothes. That night, things escalated. I was in my bathroom again, avoiding the toilet as best I could, when the tapping turned into a banging. There were sharp, forceful knocks, and they were so loud that they rattled the lid. I froze, staring at it from the doorway. The water in the bowl started rippling, small waves spreading out like something was moving beneath the surface. Then, clear as day, a voice rasped from the drain, a guttural, "Help me." I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. The room felt colder, the air heavy, and when I flicked on the light, I swear I saw a shadow dart across the mirror, too fast to be my reflection. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch, Googling anything I could think of, haunted toilet, park mysteries, strange noises in the bathroom. Most of it was junk, plumbing tips or ghost stories too wild to believe, but then I found an old news article buried in a local archive. It was from 15 years ago, about a man who'd gone missing near the park. His last known location? The park's public restroom, just a few yards from that bench. The article mentioned a detail that made my blood run cold. When they searched the bathroom, they found the toilet missing, ripped clean out of the floor, like someone had taken it. Ultimately, the case went cold, and no one ever figured out what happened. My mind raced back to the toilet in the park. Was it the same one? How did it end up there, looking brand new after all these years? And why was it messing with me? The next day, I went back to the park, determined to get answers. The toilet was still there, and this time I didn't sit. I circled it, inspecting every inch. That's when I saw it, a small, faded sticker on the underside of the tank, barely legible. It was a manufacturer's label, dated 2008, the year the man disappeared. I started to feel sick. I wanted to leave it alone, but something told me I couldn't. That night, the noises in my bathroom hit a new level. The banging was relentless, and the voice grew clearer, pleading, "Find me, find me." I grabbed a flashlight and, against every instinct, lifted the lid of my own toilet. The water was dark, unnaturally so, and as I shone the light inside, I saw something, a shape, faint and distorted, like a face staring up at me. I dropped the lid and ran out, slamming the door behind me. The next morning, I called a plumber, desperate for a rational explanation. He checked everything, pipes, tank, and drains, but found nothing wrong. However, when I mentioned the toilet in the park, his face changed. He hesitated, then said, "You're not the first to ask about that. A few years back, someone else saw it, started hearing things too. They moved away after that." He wouldn't say more, just packed up and left. I haven't gone back to the park since. Noises in my bathroom stopped after a week, but I still avoided it at night. Sometimes, when it's quiet, I think I hear that dripping again, faint and far away. I don't know what that toilet was, some kind of marker, a cursed object, or just a coincidence tied to something awful, but I do know one thing, it wasn't random. Whoever or whatever left it there wanted someone to find it and to listen. And now, I can't help but wonder if it's still out there, waiting for the next person to sit down and hear its call. I've been a plumber for 23 years, and as you might imagine, I've seen some gross and downright disturbing stuff. However, there was one service call that will always stay with me more than the others. It happened a couple of years back, during one of those brutal winter nights when the wind howls like it's alive and the cold seeps into your bones no matter how many layers you're wearing. I just finished a long day and was about to call it quits when my phone buzzed with an urgent job. The client sounded frantic, something about a bathroom sink that wouldn't stop dripping no matter what they tried. Against my better judgment, I agreed to swing by. The address was an apartment complex downtown, one of those old brick buildings that's been around since the 40s, with too many stories clinging to its walls. When I got there, the lobby was dim, the fluorescent lights buzzing like dying insects. The elevator was out of order, so I hauled my tools up 4 flights of creaky stairs to apartment 4C. I knocked, and the door opened almost instantly, revealing a guy in his late 20s, pale and twitchy, with sweat beading on his forehead despite the chill. "It's in there," he said, jabbing a thumb toward the bathroom. It won't stop, and it's weird. You'll see." He didn't elaborate. Instead, he just stepped aside to let me in. The apartment smelled stale, like damp carpet and unwashed dishes, and the air felt thick, heavy with something I couldn't place. The bathroom was at the end of a short hallway, the door slightly ajar. I pushed it open and flicked on the light. It was a cramped space, peeling linoleum, a chipped tub, and a sink with rust stains bleeding into the porcelain. The drip was loud, a steady plink 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 that echoed off the tiles. I set my toolbox down and leaned over the sink to take a look. The faucet was old, the kind with separate hot and cold knobs, and sure enough, water was beating at the spout, falling in perfect rhythmic drops. I turned the knob to tighten it, but the dripping didn't stop. If anything, it got faster, plink plink plink, almost like it was mocking me. I grabbed my wrench and got to work, figuring the washer inside was shot. But as I twisted the faucet apart, I noticed something odd. The water wasn't clear. Instead, it was murky, tinged with a faint reddish brown, like rust, or blood. Now, I've seen rusty pipes before, so I brushed it off and kept going. But that's when I heard it, a low hum barely audible, coming from the drain. It wasn't the usual gurgle of water. It was steady, almost musical, like someone humming a tune far away. I paused, straining to listen. The hum shifted, turning into a soft, breathy sound, like a sigh. Then it stopped, and the dripping was the only noise again. I shook my head, telling myself it was late and I was tired. I reached for my flashlight to check the pipes under the sink. The beam caught something glinting in the drain, a tiny metallic shimmer. I grabbed a pair of needle-nose pliers and fished it out. It was a ring, a thin silver band with a small, cloudy stone. Nothing fancy, but it looked old, worn smooth by time. I set it on the counter and went back to work, but the second I turned away, I heard a clink, the ring hitting the floor. I looked down. It was rolling toward the tub, like something had nudged it. I picked it up, frowning, and put it back on the counter, pressing it down this time. 2 seconds later, clink, it was rolling again. My skin prickled. I glanced at the doorway, half expecting the guy to be watching, but the hall was empty. The apartment was dead quiet except for that damn drip, now a frantic plink plink plink. I turned back to the sink, and the water was darker, almost black, pooling in the basin before oozing down the drain. The humming started again, louder and closer, vibrating through the pipes. I leaned in, shining my light into the drain, and that's when I saw it, a flicker of movement deep in the blackness. Something pale darted across the beam, too fast to make out, followed by a wet, scraping sound, like fingernails dragging along the inside of the pipe. I jerked back, my head slamming in my chest. The light in the room dimmed, then surged, casting wild shadows on the walls. The air turned cold, so cold I could see my breath, and the mirror above the sink fogged up, a thin layer of mist spreading across the glass. Then, slowly, letters started to form in the condensation, scratched out like someone was writing with a trembling finger. Mine. I stumbled backward, my boot catching on the edge of the tub. The dripping stopped, replaced by a gurgling choke, and the sink began to overflow, black water spilling over the rim and splattering onto the floor. The ring flew off the counter again, this time landing in the puddle, and I swear I saw it sink, like something pulled it under. The humming turned into a voice, a woman's voice, faint and broken. "Give it back, give it back." It was coming from the drain, echoing up through the pipes. I grabbed my tools and bolted. The bathroom door slammed shut as I reached it, but I threw my shoulder against it and burst into the hall. The guy was standing there, wide-eyed, like he'd heard it too. "What the hell was that?" I yelled, but he just shook his head, muttering, "I told you it was weird." At this point, I didn't wait for any explanation. I was down the stairs and out of that building faster than I've ever moved in my life. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I called the landlord to follow up, pretending I left something behind. He sounded annoyed, but let slip that the last tenant in 4C had been an old woman who died in that bathroom, slipped in the tub and hit her head. They found her days later, still clutching a silver ring she never took off. No one knew how it ended up in the sink, but after she was gone, tenants started complaining about the dripping. And the noises. He laughed it off, but I could hear the unease in his voice. I haven't been back to that complex since. I still have nightmares about that voice in that black water, and those words on the mirror. Sometimes, when I'm working on a sink, I catch myself listening to the drain, waiting for that hum to start again. And every now and then, I'll find a ring in my toolbox, one I never put there. I still remember the day in 5th grade when our class got a new student, Amanda. She wasn't like the rest of us. While we were busy with dodgeball or sneaking candy under the desks, Amanda was the quiet kid in the corner, always clutching a sketchbook. At first I thought she was just shy, but then I saw what she was drawing. Bathrooms. Pages and pages of them. Tiled floors, porcelain sinks, shower heads with little arrows pointing to water flow optimization. She'd muttered to herself about drain efficiency or how the school's faucets wasted water. Once, during recess, I caught her standing outside the girls' bathroom, timing how long it took for the automatic lights to turn off. 15 seconds, she said when she saw me staring. That's too short. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and walked away. Kids called her bathroom girl behind her back, but she didn't seem to care. It was creepy, sure, but at that age, you just kinda shrug off weirdness like that. Fast forward to my late 20s. I hadn't thought about Amanda in years until I ran into her at a local coffee shop. She looked different, taller, polished, with a sharp bob haircut and a briefcase slung over her shoulder. I almost didn't recognize her until she smiled and said, "Jordan, right? From Miss Carter's class?" We got to talking, and she told me she turned her childhood obsession into a career. "I'm a bathroom scientist," she said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. She worked for some high-end company, designing eco-friendly bathroom systems, smart toilets, water-saving showers, that kind of stuff. I was impressed, maybe even a little charmed by how passionate she was. We swapped numbers and started texting, and within a few weeks we were dating. It felt like one of those full-circle moments, you know? The weird kid from 5th grade was now this brilliant, quirky woman who laughed at my dumb jokes. Things were good for a while. Amanda was fun, smart, and didn't mind that I wasn't exactly a high achiever. I worked nights at a warehouse, nothing fancy. But her bathroom fixation never really went away. Her apartment was like a shrine to sanitation, spotless tiles, a bidet she'd installed herself, and shelves full of books like The History of Plumbing and Bathroom Ergonomics. She'd ramble about how bathrooms were the most underestimated room in any home, and I'd just nod along. Then, about 2 months in, she invited me to her place after work to show me something special. "This is my latest project," she said, opening the door to her guest bathroom. It didn't look like much at first, just a small room with beige walls, a sink and a toilet. But then she flicked a switch, and the lights dimmed to this eerie blue glow. The sink started running on its own, a slow trickle, and the toilet flushed without anyone touching it. "It's a fully automated system," she explained, her voice buzzing with excitement. "Motion sensors, water recyclers, even a built-in air purifier. I've been tweaking it for months." I forced a smile. "That's cool, really high-tech." She grabbed my hand, her grip a little too tight. "Want to test it? Just wash your hands, tell me what you think." I didn't see the harm, so I stepped up to the sink. The water felt oddly warm, and there was this faint vibration under my feet, like the pipes were humming. As I dried my hands on a towel, I glanced at the mirror and froze. My reflection looked wrong. My eyes were too wide, my mouth twisted into this weird half-smile I wasn't making. I blinked, and it was back to normal. "You okay?" Amanda asked, watching me closely. "Yeah, just tired," I lied. "Long shift." She nodded, but her eyes lingered on me, like she was studying my reaction. After that night, I started avoiding her bathroom. I'd use excuses, like I just went at work or I'm good, thanks, but Amanda kept pushing me to try it again. "It's perfectly safe," she'd say. "I need feedback for my data." Then, more weird stuff started happening. I'd wake up at her place with no memory of falling asleep, my hands pruned like I'd been soaking them for hours. Once, I found a damp towel on my pillow, even though I hadn't showered. I asked Amanda about it, and she just shrugged. Maybe you're sleepwalking, stress from work? But I knew it wasn't stress. One night, I crashed at her place after a late shift. Around 3 a.m., I jolted awake to the sound of running water. The bedroom was dark, but a sliver of light crept under the bathroom door down the hall. I got up, figuring Amanda was in there, but when I checked her side of the bed, she was gone. The water kept running, drip, 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 so I padded over to the bathroom. The door was cracked open, and that blue light spilled out, flickering like a dying bulb. I pushed it wider and saw Amanda standing at the sink, her back to me, staring into the mirror. She wasn't moving, just standing there, the water overflowing onto the floor. "Amanda?" I whispered, but there was no response. I stepped closer, and that's when I heard it, a low gurgling sound, like something clogging the drain. The air felt thick, heavy with this metallic smell I couldn't place. I reached for her shoulder, but before I could touch her, she whipped around. Her eyes were bloodshot, her face pale, and she muttered, "It's in the pipes." "What's in the pipes?" I asked, my stomach twisting. She didn't answer, but just pointed at the sink. I looked down, and the water wasn't clear anymore. It was murky, streaked with something dark and sludgy. The gurgling got louder, and then the sink shook like something was forcing its way up. I stumbled back, heart hammering. "We need to get out of here," I said, grabbing her arm. But she pulled away, her voice rising. "No, I have to see it through. I've been waiting for this." "Waiting for what?" I yelled. She turned back to the sink, and that's when I saw it, a black, glistening tendril, thin as a finger, slithering out of the drain. It coiled around the faucet, pulsing, and the gurgling turned into this wet, choking sound, like a scream underwater. Amanda leaned closer, whispering, "I knew it. I knew they were alive." I didn't wait to find out what they were. I bolted, slamming the bathroom door behind me, and ran for the front door. My keys were on the counter, thank God, and I was out of there in seconds, barefoot in my boxers, peeling out of the parking lot like my life depended on it. I didn't stop until I got to my buddy's place across town. He let me crash on his couch, no questions asked, though I'm sure I looked like a wreck. The next day, I texted Amanda, "What the hell was that?" She replied hours later, "A breakthrough, you wouldn't understand." I blocked her number after that. I couldn't deal with it. I didn't go back for my stuff either. Clothes, toothbrush, whatever, it didn't matter. But then, a week later, my buddy forwarded me an article from the local news. Woman hospitalized after chemical leak in apartment. It was Amanda. They found her passed out in her bathroom, surrounded by busted pipes and some unidentified black residue. The official story was a plumbing malfunction, but I know better. I've moved since then and got a new job, and I've tried to put it all behind me. But I still can't use a bathroom without checking the drain first, waiting for that gurgle. Sometimes, late at night, I dream about her voice. It's in the pipes, and wake up tasting that metallic tang in the air. Whatever Amanda found, whatever she was chasing with her experiments, I hope it stays buried. Because if it doesn't, I don't think I'll be lucky enough to run away twice.